What is my life? I'm nearly an adult. I should be outside socialising with friends. But instead, I'm writing a review about a movie that only a good majority of the UK viewers will know. So... sorry any American viewers. Okay, Nativity. A movie about a failed actor turned primary school teacher being tasked to put on a nativity for his class. That's a simple plot. From what I've heard, a lot of people from the UK grew up on this movie, like me, but I think a good majority have forgotten its existence, also like me. I did however used to watch it every Christmas, but now that's not the case. Instead it's just the classics like Home Alone and Trading Places. So with Christmas around the corner, now would be the perfect time to revisit it, and see if it's as good or as bad as I remember. Now, one thing I'll do differently with this video that I don't do with my others, is that I'm not going to do segments, and I'm just going to go through the film, scene for scene. Also, if I feel like it, aka if this movie isn't entirely bad, I may or may not review the second one. Okay? Okay. The movie introduces us to Paul, Jennifer and Gordon, three friends who are actors, but all of them get sick of acting. That's great consistency already. But yeah, after going nowhere for, I'm presuming, a while, they all go down different career paths. Paul becomes a teacher, Jennifer becomes a producer, remember that later, and Gordon becomes a boarding school teacher. Actually, now that I think about it, Paul and Gordon's lives aren't that different. But what makes their lives different is the nativities. In short, Gordon makes good ones, Paul makes bad ones. It's like comparing The Godfather with The Room, because his last nativity somehow managed to get -2 stars. If anything, it makes The Room look like Psycho, and because his nativity is so bad and his jealousy for Gordon hits an all-time high, he then says,
"And that's when I decided I hated Christmas."
I thought this was Nativity, not The Grinch. Then we cut to 5 years later, and Paul, or Mr. Maddens, is still a teacher. This is where I should probably mention the first positive of this movie, Martin Freeman. He does fine, but to do fine in a movie like this is a huge compliment. I don't think he's the best teacher out of the 4 movies. Yes, 4. But he holds his own here. We see how life's going for him. It's not good. We are introduced to a head teacher though, who, out of nowhere, assigns Paul to direct the school's nativity that year. I've probably already said a lot within the first, 2 to 3 minutes of the review. That's because there's way too much going on. The pacing of this movie is just way too fast. Once a scene is over, it doesn't give you a second to process what just happened. You're thrown into another scene and think, oh, okay, and continue watching like nothing happened. And to add insult to injury, he's now going to have a supply teacher working with him. Now, it is time I introduce, by far, the worst character in the Nativity cinematic universe. Desmond Poppy. This guy is an absolute menace to society and the school he works in. Across the 3 movies he is in, someone should have stopped him and sent him to jail at one point. And they never do. He's freely allowed to act like a crackhead on the loose, constantly putting the children in danger. Why hasn't he been fired yet, you may ask? Well, he's Miss Trunchbull's nephew. Wait a minute, she should just be fired on the spot just for employing him? So after a bit of bonding and arguing from both Paul and Desmond, they venture on an epic quest to pick up a Christmas tree. This scene where they're talking about ideas for the nativity is probably one of the best scenes. Seeing 2 polar opposites discuss what's right and what's wrong to put in a children's nativity, with ideas such as a BMX and a deaf lad thrown into the mix, is surprisingly kind of entertaining to watch. But none of that matters, as when they arrive, a new challenger appears. Or not new, since I mentioned them before. Anyway, it's Gordon. Paul and Gordon catch up, have some friendly banter, all is good, until Paul airdrops about Jennifer and Hollywood coming to his nativity, when this isn't the case whatsoever. So as an audience member, I now have to wait for the liar revealed scene. Cheers. And to add insult to injury, it's not even Paul or Gordon who makes this a big thing, it's Mr. Poppy. And you thought I was joking when I said someone should stop that man. Not only does he tell the school, he also tells the news as well. It's like Mr. Maddens is in a hole and Mr. Poppy's the one who's dug it. Surprisingly, after realising that Mr. Poppy knew what he said, Paul isn't mad. He's furious. When he's pretending to act like Hollywood are coming, look at his face. No one realised he was angry. Anyway, now we have a bunch of children performing for the teachers. Jeez, that sounds wrong. But if there's one compliment I can give this scene, it's that it's 1,000 times better than that one scene in Sing, because it's nowhere near as annoying as Pig. What even is his name? Mr. Poppy and Mr. Madden's only at this point probably contemplated their life choices, realising there's no way they'll make a show good enough to get Hollywood and Paul's ex-girlfriend's attention. But don't worry, Mr. Poppy's got an amazing plan to get Jennifer and Hollywood to the school. He decides to blow up Paul's dog and tell Jennifer's parents about it. I am not joking, it is as stupid as it sounds. And the funniest thing about this is that Mr. Poppy actually goes through with it, and somehow the parents believe him over their daughter's ex-boyfriend. But the scene actually works for me because it's one of these scenes where it's so bad it's good. Unfortunately, it's not like that the whole movie though.
Well, we're both.
The day after also shows how useless that scene was, because Paul and Desmond both barely talk about the night before, and instead still go on about how to contact Jennifer. Why is Mr. Poppy so manipulative? When they're creating songs, the kids sing what Mr. Poppy tells them and ignore Mr. Madden's. Don't worry children, Mr. Poppy is a lovely human being. It's not like he's committed any war crimes within the first half an hour of this movie. No, he would never do that. And then 2 scenes later, him and Paul and the kids are watching a bear for a hospital. How did we get here? And then they finally start practicing the Nativity. I'm pretty sure I mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. This film just moves way too fast, because then we've got another scene of the children performing 2 by 2. At this point, the film kind of looks like a documentary, which took me out of the film for about 5 minutes, except the part where 2 boys are fighting, but then it returns to its documentary-like film. If you watch this movie and watch this scene, where Paul is giving a talk to one of his students, the way the camera's angled, the tone and the music really makes it feel like a documentary. Now, back to Gordon. He is generally worried that Paul's Hollywood nativity will overshadow his nativity. How gullible is this guy? And this isn't just one movie. All the other nativity movies, he has the same character traits. You'd think at the end of each movie he'd learn something, but the only time he learns something is in this movie. So since Gordon is worried about this, him and the students go to the primary school to try and spy and see what St. Bernadette's are doing. That's the primary school, by the way. I don't know if I mentioned that before. Instead of seeing some high-tech equipment or incredibly talented A-list actors, they see a bunch of kids doing some questionable dancing to the Jackson 5's I Want You Back. In fact, it's that questionable that I don't feel comfortable enough putting it on my channel. So, here's some footage of the Jackson 5. You're welcome. Then Gordon intends to start a riot. Okay, maybe Mr. Poppy isn't that bad. But then Mr. Poppy actually starts a riot. Okay, yes, he is actually that bad. So the 2 schools get into a clan war, clan versus clan war. Everyone's getting involved, and when I say everyone, I mean everyone, even the teachers, which is just so surreal and laughable. But like I said before, the movie is incredibly fast paced, so the teachers only get involved for like 10 seconds. And then we have quite a few pointless scenes that, yet again, go way too fast. Like how Desmond and Paul try and contact Jennifer again, and Paul admitting to lying to another teacher in the primary school who adds nothing to the story. Like, she's just here to call Paul out on his lying and tell Mrs. Bevan that Paul lies later. That's it. But one thing that she does suggest that yet again goes nowhere is to get the kids to sing some songs on a DVD and send it to Jennifer. Now, Jennifer does in fact see the DVD like 20 seconds later, because if this movie was a fictional character, it would be Sonic the Hedgehog. But when Paul goes to see her like 15 minutes later, it seems like she hasn't been emotionally affected one slight bit. Then we have a scene that has nothing to do with the last scene, even though it's not. This movie almost feels like it has a non-linear narrative. You could put this scene of the... Wait, what is this? A guest ball? Anyways, who cares? Mrs. Bevan and Paul are invited, and the only reason we know they're invited is right at the end of the scene. Come on. Now this movie is making incredibly amateurish mistakes that are easy to get right. If we know what they're there for, establish it at the start. Anyway, they meet the Lord Mayor of their city, but the great thing about him is that he has a beautiful accent.
You look like a Christmas cracker.
Thank you very much.
Let's hope you get pulled before the end of the night.
Music to my ears. But oh no, Gordon is here. Is there going to be another clan war? Clan versus clan war? Nope. Instead, this guy, who I forgot his name, but he just looks so familiar, tells Paul that it was Gordon who convinced Jennifer to go to Hollywood in the first place.
Top 10 anime betrayal.
But all that doesn't matter, yet again, because we finally find out why Bevan and Paul are at the ball. Because they are given the city's cathedral ruins as a venue for their nativity. This, in all seriousness, is a huge win for Mr. Maddens and the school, but for some reason he doesn't seem happy whatsoever. So are you telling me that Paul would rather have a nativity in a small crammed primary school hall than a spaced out cathedral with a high spire that allows nativity to have a death slide? For the only time in this movie, Mr. Poppy is actually justified for even mentioning a death slide in the first place, and the fact that he mentions it at this point in the movie leaves us eagerly waiting for the actual nativity even more. And then blah blah blah, more screen time of the kids practicing for the nativity. There's even a montage which actually isn't that bad. This girl gets extra screen time because she's the director's daughter. No, I'm not joking, look it up. Literally 2 of the 3 things I mentioned have already happened, that's why I'm rushing through this part. The amount of repetitiveness is really taking a toll on me, mentally. Okay, now we have a very unusual but plot driving scene. So after having a one-to-one with the director's daughter, I swear to God, no one better take that out of context. Paul reads a bunch of Christmas lists from his students, and this is actually kind of sad. He realises that he can't always give his students what he wants, and with the sad tone being brought over from the last scene is probably the only time in the film where the tone is consistent. But then the next scene is happy and uplifting, because Paul goes to the children and says this.
Right! Who wants to go on a death slide?
But not only that, he then tells Mr. Poppy that he's going to Hollywood. And can I just say how awkward Martin Freeman looks in this scene? In other scenes it's okay for him to be awkward because it fits with that scene. But here he shouldn't be awkward whatsoever. He said his death slide line with pure confidence not even 15 seconds before. But before Paul flies off to Hollywood, Mr. Poppy kidnaps 2 of the students so that they can show Hollywood that they're talented. Hold on, I think we got the wrong movie script. No? Okay. Mr. Poppy actually kidnaps 2 children. I'm serious at this point. Someone needs to stop this menace. Very soon, he is actually going to be committing war crimes. Anyways, Paul and the 2 classmates fly to Hollywood, and he instantly gets 4 stars and gets arrested. Okay, I'm actually joking. They actually do a bit of sightseeing, and can I just say it's nice to see a change of scenery. Because if I saw one more scene inside the school, or in a British house, I'd probably end up going down the same career path as Mr. Poppy. But now we have probably the most unrealistic scene in the entire movie. Basically, Paul and the students, hey, that sounds like a band, like Huey Lewis and the News.
You like Huey Lewis and the News?
Yes.
Anyway, Paul and the students end up on a film production plot, and they get pressured by a security guard to show their ID.
ID!
Now, Paul hasn't got ID, so what do he and the kids do? They run away from the security guard into the film plot. Tell you what, Mr. Poppy taught Mr. Maddens well. Maybe he is a good teaching assistant. But what makes this more unrealistic is that the security guard can't even outpace 2 9-year-olds. And he also trips on nothing. This scene is more unrealistic than the scene in Sharknado, when the guy jumps in a shark with a chainsaw. Okay, somehow they managed to make it in the actual building, without any more security stopping them. Didn't the security guard from before have a radio to notify other security guards? No? Okay. Paul finds Jennifer and just doesn't seem to be interested, even though we had an entire scene of her crying when she realises how much Paul misses her. You know what, I give up on how inconsistent this movie is. But it turns out she's not a Hollywood producer, but instead a secretary. What does this add? So then Paul and the kids do the same thing to Jennifer that they did to the security guard, which is run away. I'm not joking. Then they find this random guy with a nice moustache. Like, who is he? The kids perform for him. Don't take this out of context. I think he liked it. But that doesn't matter because they finally get kicked out. Although after they're kicked out, Jennifer and the nice moustache man then discuss whether they should actually go to the nativity that Paul is putting on. See this, ladies and gentlemen? This is character development. Then it cuts back to the UK where Mr. Maddens, Mr. Poppy, and that one teacher that Mr. Poppy was talking to before are getting shouted at by Miss Bevan. By the way, I'm sorry I'm starting my sentences with but and then a lot. It's just, those are the only words I can think of that can connect 2 scenes together. Because as I said before, this movie goes by too fast. Anyway, Mrs. Bevan thought the children were actually abducted, but Paul has the permissions, and this is what's on them.
What is this?
I don't know what that is.
What is that?
This is probably the closest attempt the film had to making me laugh, because it's like it's almost too bizarre for this movie. Also, I'm going to give you a guess on who wrote that. So yeah, that one female teacher tells Mrs. Bevan that Hollywood isn't coming. Paul has to tell the students that they can't do the nativity, even though they can still do it without Hollywood. Mr. Poppy is let go, Mr. Madden stays at the school until Christmas term is over. The end. This film was kind of draining, but it was cool to revisit. Hang on. Something's up. We've still got half an hour to go. Let's finally get this over with.
You will try.
So Mr. Madden's is still teaching the students who clearly aren't happy, but he just kind of ignores them. Kinda like my parents with me my entire life. Why are they unhappy, you may ask? Well, it's because they don't have their Lord and Saviour, Desecration Poppy. When they tell Paul about him, Paul starts thinking of all the quote-unquote good times Mr. Poppy had with him, and the students. But that's not even close to the most bizarre thing he does, because then he says this.
Meet me in the hall in 10 minutes. We're doing the play.
Keep in mind, this is not even 5 minutes after he said they weren't doing the play. I know what you're thinking, but we've said it so many times, I'm just gonna skip over it. Paul goes to recruit Mr. Poppy, who's been living in a caravan, with myself. I'm sorry, that was an awful joke. Anyway, the apology Paul gives to Desmond is actually pretty sincere, but at the same time, shouldn't Desmond be apologising? He's the one who started all the mess. He's the reason both of them have lost and are going to lose their job. Oh, he's not apologising? Oh, great! Now, here's the moment we've all been waiting for. To see this Nativity the movie has been building up since like the first 5 minutes of the movie. Mr. Poppy and Mr. Madden's versus the world. So how is this 3D musical in 5D sound? It's alright. I will say that is probably the best part of the film, because for over an hour you get thrown to inconsistent stuff that doesn't make sense, and simply annoying stuff, whilst the whole Nativity forgets nearly all of that, because what you get is a bunch of songs that are actually alright for a kids film. I did complain before about how anything in this movie filmed in England looks visually bland. Like, if this movie visually was a cereal, it would be Rice Krispies. But the black stage, mixing with bright colours such as white and yellow, looks pretty good visually. Although all there is to this is just a performance where, for once in the movie, you actually feel relaxed. There are actually two things that I must address. The first is that when Gordon calls out Paul for Hollywood not being at the Nativity, right as he says that, a helicopter shows up and Mr. Poppy says, how does he know that helicopter is from Hollywood? For all we know, that could be the BBC or another news station. But since it's Mr. Poppy, everyone in the movie believes him. Of course. The second thing I have to address is the fact that Jennifer and the guy with the nice moustache for some reason show up. Why on earth would they show up to this? They're halfway across the world. There are plenty of other nativities in the States they could have seen. And in their last interaction together, Jennifer looked like she'd moved on from Paul. But no, Jennifer seems to care again, they have a hug and a kiss. The nativity they put on was extremely popular, yada yada yada, the film is over. For real this time. We did it.
We won.
All right, hey. All right, good job, guys.
It was really interesting to rewatch the first movie of the NCU, even though the film wasn't that good. It was nice to go through a little nostalgia trip for nearly 2 hours. Also, remember what I said at the start of the video about reviewing the other Nativity films? Well, next Christmas, I'll probably review Nativity 2. That is, if I'm still doing this a year from now. Or if I'm still alive by then. Anyway, if you've never seen this movie, I'm not sure if it deserves a watch or not. There are definitely a lot of so bad they're good moments, but I wouldn't say it's like that the entire way through. So maybe you'll get some enjoyment out of this, I don't know. So as for Nativity, I'd give it a 4 out of 10, and as for Mr. Poppy, I sentence him to 3 years in prison. Oh, you thought I forgot about him? You thought wrong. I've finally put that menace behind bars. He can't harm anyone anymore. I mean, what's the worst that could happen? It's not like he's going to break out and make another one of these movies, whilst committing more war crimes against the teachers and children.